To start the day off, to start this morning off, we have a really amazing panel. And this panel is focused on the idea of broadcasting happiness. So the panel is going to be moderated by Gielan, who we all heard from yesterday. She gave a phenomenal talk. She's the author of Broadcasting Happiness, a CBS anchor turned positive psychologist. Our panel, go ahead, give it up for her as moderator. So the panel is going to consist of Ismael Cala, who we heard from on Friday. He gave a very beautiful, vulnerable, and honest talk to all of us on Friday, and he is famous all across Latin America. Many of you have probably seen him on CNN in Espanol. Additionally, we have Josh Duncan from Tonic, which is Vice's wellness and health media channel, and we have Deborah Heisz from Live Happy, which is a magazine published bi-monthly and a broader media outlet. So please join me in welcoming our entire panel up to the stage now.
How are y'all doing this morning? So my favorite part about, well, this entire time, but especially yesterday, was I got to hear from so many of you about how you're using the research, your awesome stories, how you're broadcasting happiness. So thank you so much for sharing that, because this is the best part of my job, to get to talk to you. So thank you. So we have, well, three of my favorite people in the world sitting right here, which is so cool. So you heard a brief introduction about them, but what I would love to do is give them an opportunity to explain in a little bit more depth what they do, and then to open up the conversation so we can talk about some of the questions that we are facing right now about the media, about transforming our own stories, about what millennials are teaching us, about the changing conversation in health right now. Deborah, I would love for you to start, because you're sitting next to me. And you have done something absolutely revolutionary with Live Happy magazine, changing the conversation and opening up a space for us to focus on happiness, for it not to be a four-letter word, right? So tell me a little bit about Live Happy magazine, and more about also the mission behind it, what drove you to make this decision.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, as you guys may or may not know, is one of our columnists, frequent columnists in Live Happy magazine. She and Sean have been right there from the beginning with us, from the start, and it's been a great honor to have them as part of this journey with us. We founded Live Happy magazine out of really positive psychology. I was working for Success magazine, the current version of Success magazine, which is really a personal development magazine for those of you who haven't picked it up. It looks like a business magazine, but really it's full of content around personal development. And I was disillusioned in that space because there's a lot of talking heads in that space. So they talk about improving people, but what they're really talking about is their own personal experience, or what they've done, or their own personal mantra, which is all good, but none of it necessarily was transferable to other people. I can't get up on stage and be Zig Ziglar. I mean, Zig Ziglar, and he was a great thinker, he's a great man, and he helped a lot of people. But it was difficult to translate what he did into everyday life. And what happened is I went to International Positive Psychology Association meeting, I guess at this point, 8 years ago, and was just floored by the amount of research that's available on how to live a better life, about how to create better well-being. And it was transformative for me because I'd always had a little bit of a distaste for what I'm going to call the talking head syndrome in personal development, the people who really don't know what they're talking about. I mentioned Zig, he wasn't one of them, but there are lots of people out there that are making their living talking to you and selling you books that don't really transform your life. But positive psychology was the study of stuff that actually would work. So it really was a science. And at that meeting, I realized no one else knew about this. I mean, there was all these researchers talking about it, but it was almost hidden and behind the doors. And so it became a mission to come out with Live Happy and to really start sharing that fantastic information, that fantastic research with the world. And we jokingly say our mission is small. It's to make the world a better place. Our mission is to change the world. It's a small mission, small. But really, that's what it's about. It's sharing the fantastic work that's being done by all these researchers with the rest of the world. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to do that. So that's what Live Happy is about. That's our mission. And if you haven't checked us out, we hope you do.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, Ismael, you had a similar journey in that you were working in news broadcasting, very prestigious position, lots of reach, and then something changed inside of you, and you made a pivot in your work. Tell us about that journey, and now, you know, how you are changing the conversation with the work that you do.
Thank you, Michelle, and good morning. I'm so thrilled and humbled to be part of this panel. It's amazing for me. And yeah, well, you know, I started doing radio when I was only 8 years old. I didn't have a mission, a purpose, or a sense of service in doing anything that I broadcasted. It was for me, as any other regular kid, a joyful moment going to that radio station every Saturday. Then I started doing TV when I was only 15. Again, it was really nice, an opportunity. I became popular, so it was like my ego got so huge when I was only like 15 years old. And then I did radio and TV in my native Cuba until I was 28 with no sense of real purpose. I didn't really have a mission in why, if I have this great opportunity to talk to millions of people listening or watching me, what is my message or the purpose? Yeah. But then when I left Cuba, I went to Toronto, Canada, and no cameras, no microphones in front of me. I was a political refugee in Canada, starting over my life and waiting on people at a restaurant. I was a waiter. And because I didn't have that sense of serving, I was doing that job thinking that people were so stingy, not giving me tips. But it was my fault because I wasn't really investing anything on them. So one night, there was a lady coming to the restaurant and she said, "Are you the guy from Cuban TV? Because I'm here visiting. What are you doing here serving me? I don't understand." You were kind of, and then my ego got like a huge stab. And I went to the kitchen crying, but I couldn't tell my friends in the kitchen that was the real reason that I was crying, because I felt so stupid. And then I said, something is wrong with me, because I've been doing my entire life this with no sense of purpose. And that night, it was like a bath of humility and sense of, why are you going to come back to the media? Because that's your purpose. Yeah. That changed my kind of personal intention in coming back to media. So when I really did it again, after 2 years being in Canada, just doing these kind of jobs to find my way again, I said, well, I have to do something serving others. And it changed my entire intention. So when I went to CNN as a reporter in 2001, I said, okay, I'm reporting news. Journalists are not supposed to have a soul. That's what they tell you. I mean, you report facts and facts and facts, and that's not true because we are subjective beings. Yeah. So in the last 6 years that I had the opportunity to have kind of the Larry King interview show on the prime time on CNN en Español, my intention was clear. I said, I have to put a soul in everything that we broadcast. Wonderful. Even if it's a tragedy, it's not only broadcasting the tragedy, we have to tell people how we can all contribute and elevate consciousness. And the show really made a difference on the programming of CNN en Español. I got still conflicts between my ego and the soul in what I'm doing, what I can do better. And I decided that it was the time to quit the show and quit CNN for a while to kind of put everything in perspective. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm in a phase of not being on mainstream media, broadcasting from our own platforms with my team and selecting what we can put out that will make a positive impact in people. And we are just in this phase now creating a more positive environment to affect the world.
And doing amazing work within it, meditation programs and radio programs that are really inspiring people in tremendous ways. I love that. And John, tell us about, so you're with Vice Media, tell us about what drew you to the work you're doing now and why you're so passionate about changing the conversation, specifically in the health arena.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me here this morning. It's quite an electric environment here. And congratulations to World Happiness Summit on this. It's interesting. I mean, I think so. For those who aren't familiar with Vice, we're a youth media company. We reach around 300 million people globally a month across social, digital, mobile, TV. And in November, we launched Tonic, which is our health initiative, which I oversee. And I think we had asked our audience what they wanted to hear more from us on, and the number one thing they said was health. And I think as a sort of an offshoot of that is then happiness. I think people are looking for sort of guidance from media today to help them find that purpose and to help them educate them on that purpose with a sort of science-backed, research, data-driven way, but doing that in a contextual way. And the way we approach it is we want to be your companion on your journey through life as it relates to health and happiness and all that other stuff related to that. And so we're putting out daily editorial content, daily social content, video content on Snapchat, on YouTube, on all that other kind of stuff. And so it's an exciting endeavor, and I think this audience here speaks to the power that health and happiness has, and it's about harnessing that power to then sort of go out and change the world in a positive way.
Excellent. So how did we get where we are today? Originally, the news was brought by a little man on a horse, or a big man maybe, I don't know, or a woman, who knows. But, would come and tell you the news that you needed to know so that you could stay safe, right? And it's now blown up into what we have today, which feels very, very negative. There's a lot of wonderful people in media, as you all know, that are, they're bright lights too, but I don't think the system is necessarily supporting the discussion of the kinds of topics that you have chosen to focus on, that we all have. How did we get here today? What led us to this place?
Let me take a stab at that. I think that the advent of the 24-hour news cycle, CNN, not a knock on CNN, but the advent of the 24-hour news cycle led people to think they needed to fill it up with something.
Yeah.
And they fill it up with what people pay attention to. And there is some truth to, if you see the car wreck on the side of the road, you slow down to look at it. And that kind of feeds something in people that they want to see the negative, or they want to hear about celebrities. I mean, not to pick on a celebrity, but how much news was there about Lindsay Lohan in the early 2000s, right? How much news is there really important about Lindsay Lohan? Zero. But there was hours and hours devoted to things because it got ratings, because it's what people watched. And then we had more and more news channels, and we have more and more competition, and then you end up with more and more talking heads and less actual news reporting. Right?
Yeah.
And they've gotten away from, making people better. There's some great stuff. There's some great stuff on all those channels. Every channel has some great quality information, but it's buried in salacious, violent, negative content that, for whatever reason, people are drawn to. And it led us away from reporting facts and into reporting opinion, right? It's a big criticism of the news these days, and it's somewhat valid. But there's a hunger also for the positive news stories, because, CNN Heroes is one of their top things every year, and that's just about people doing good. There's a lot of hunger for that. There's just not as much money spent on acquiring that sort of news story, unfortunately. So to me, we got here because 24-hour news cycle. It's no longer 30 minutes at the end of the day. It became 24 hours a day, and it just changed the way we view the world dramatically.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a challenge, right? Because to Deborah's point, what sells is the negative headlines that you stop and say, oh my gosh, what is that? What happened?
Yeah.
And I think, though, with that, it's telling the news, but telling it in a sort of balanced way, and with that is the positive side of things. And I think there's a challenge, and then I think for media companies like ours, the challenge is on us to report that positive side of things, as well as maybe some of the negative things as well, and to celebrate those things, the positive side. And it's sort of, looking at it from a different ROI than just simply how much money can I make off of this advertisement that I'm selling against this piece of content, but rather what is the positive impact or the impact I'm having across our audience, where they want to come back because they want to read more about what we're talking about. And it's hard, because I think also you then have other people that are playing upon the negative side of things, and so it's sort of, you quickly lose sight of what it is that we're talking about in the first place. Yeah. And even to the 24-hour news cycle, it's a 24-second news cycle with things like Twitter and Facebook, where it's what happened last second or last minute, and is ever changing. And so I think, it's the ability of being present and just taking a beat and saying what's important, what matters, why do I care, and looking at it from that angle versus, oh my gosh, I need to know what Lindsay Lohan did 2 seconds ago.
And so, Ismael, when you put, the language you were using was, I think, very elevated, right? You were talking about your ego and the soul and bringing a soul into the program that you were doing at CNN Espanol. How did you pitch it to your producers when you said, hey, I've got an idea? Was it like, hey, I've got an idea, let's do a program with the soul? Or what language did you use? And then and talk to us about, was there pushback, or were people seeing it as something that could actually be successful?
Well, I have to say that I'm so glad that now, recently, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I saw that CNN produced an original series called Believer.
I love that.
And that was awesome.
Yep.
Because it's really a well-produced research of looking around the world for spirituality and mindfulness and how cultures celebrate diversity in their faith. And that's amazing. And Finding Jesus was another series, and CNN Heroes. And in my case, CNN en Español, broadcasting through the US and Latin America, I said, well, I and my team understood that. And it was a bit of a struggle with the executives, but at the end, people responded. And then I said, well, we got ratings with this guest, and he wasn't talking about a tragedy. He was talking about something positive, tools to elevate people's life, leadership or mindfulness or positive psychology. So, little by little, we were able to demonstrate and to kind of diminish their fear that positivity doesn't sell and that people are not watching. It's really risky because news organizations are commercial entities. They have to respond to the board of advisors and board of directors. They want to see profits, elevate profits year after year, and it's a vicious circle because it's true. Sometimes you say, well, if I put these 3 good news at the beginning of the newscast, people don't stay because we are already addicted to the bad news. We are addicted to those. And if you see the newscast as a show, the music that they use, no matter what the headline will be, because we don't know yet, but the music, it's dun, 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 dun. It's not a mindful and soothing music to start the newscast. And then the good thing is, I don't know if you know this, that in a half-hour newscast or in an hour-long newscast, the positive news is just for the end, for the tail. It's called the kicker. And it's when you see after so many tragedies and dead people in the world that you are taking in, then they tell you the good news in 30 seconds. Hey, good news. A new baby panda has been born in a Chinese zoo. And then you say, oh my God, something positive I got from this half an hour. So that's the reality that we have to deal with every single day. So it's a struggle, it's a battle. I got tired of it. But now when I'm out, now I say, well, as a warrior, probably it's not a good thing that everybody wants to get out of that battle. Because then we are leaving the space to people who think the same way.
Yeah.
So, that's now an internal battle that I have. Yes, I got saved, but now, okay, everybody will leave?
Yeah. Versus
we need people in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, versus working from within the system.
Yes.
It's something I've struggled with that too. Like, oh, I left CBS. Maybe should have stayed.
Exactly.
But then you don't have the journey that you have, and then we get to do things like this where we change the conversation just in different spaces. So, John, let me ask you something. You have been using all kinds of different forms of media to talk to people, right? You mentioned Snapchat. I know you can put a toast on your head, right? Like that's one of the filters. Are you guys on Snapchat? Yeah, so I have one of those. My 7-year-old niece made it for me. But so that's a platform that gets a lot of younger people, and then the more traditional, through the web and through newsletters and all that for the rest of us. How has that been successful for you, and what's the feedback loop? What are you learning from millennials, from the young people, as far as consumption and topics and whatnot?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, to that, people say sort of TV's dying. I think just the definition of TV is shifting, where Snapchat is a version of TV to someone that is not used to having a TV, right?
Yeah.
Or subscribing or paying the cable fees for monthly subscription to cable. And so obviously there's been a major increase in video content, and Snapchat is sort of the king of that, and Facebook has obviously shifted more into that. And we look at video as sort of an empathy machine, where I think you can convey sort of emotions much better than you can through text or newsletters or whatever. And so it's then how do you utilize that, and utilize that for each platform, right? On Snapchat, it's a much shorter form, whereas on YouTube, it's a longer form. Even on TV, it's 22 minutes or 48 minutes or whatever it may be. And I think the feedback we're getting is, at the core, it's because there's so much out there, it's kind of like, why do I care about this? Why should I care about this?
Yep.
And also then telling it in a way that's compelling and interesting, but also on a certain level educational, and then impactful in the sense of what can I do about it if I want to do something about it. I mean, we're seeing a lot of, people after watching some of our episodes, whether it's on HBO or on Viceland or TV channel or whatever it may be, and saying, oh, I wasn't aware of that topic, or I wasn't aware of that, I want to make a difference, what can I do? Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of something where we're looking into, how do you kind of turn on that impact arm, because it's a responsibility, right? We have the responsibility of the people coming to us every day to give them the information that they're looking for, but doing so in a way where we want to, do it in a way that it's not just completely objective, because everyone has a view on anything, right? The way I look at this table and the way you look at that table is different just because we're two different people. And so it's sort of, how do you then tell that to the audience, but then also I think at its core, what is your purpose as a company, and what is the purpose of the content? And so for us, it's sort of, and everything is then rooted in kind of the why of why are you doing it? And I think it's about like being present in that why and understanding that, because then that sort of helps solve everything else, where you can always come back to justify it. I think and for some people it may be the business objectives. To your point, it's, you've got the business side of thing. It is a commercial business, and people want to see profits and make profits. But on the other side, if it's an interesting story that no one's told before and you're telling it in a fascinating way, like that, it then holds the water that you need it to, in order to kind of broadcast it out.
Wonderful. And the tools, giving people the tools to actually take that next step. So it's not purely information, but getting them to maybe perhaps make a behavioral change as well. I think it seems so central to changing not only mindset, but action as well. And that's something you do beautifully at Live Happy. It's all the articles, the podcasts, and all the other forms that you deliver the content in. They always give key takeaways, tools, ideas that people can put into action right now. Talk to us about that process and how you figure out, which ones are good to feature, and then the feedback you get from readers.
It's really important to us not just to inform, but also to give people tools. I mean, as you said, if you're just knowing something, it doesn't necessarily get you there. So we spend a lot of time actually talking to a lot of the scientists in positive psychology. We actually have some pretty good relationships there, and we reach out, and we're always on keep our eye out for new research. But ultimately, it comes back to, what can we get people to do that will impact them enough that it'll change their lives, or change their outlook, or change their community behavior? And so you're right, we're always going down to, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can take away from this? And we give people simple actions. It's amazing how little people really recognize that they can change the way they think. And so giving people, I heard this great quote, and I love it, and somebody actually gave me a magnet with it on it, because I said I loved it the other day. But the quote is, don't believe everything you think.
I love that.
But what we encounter with a lot of readers and a lot of feedback is, I want to be happier. I want to live a better life. I don't want to be this stressed. How do I change? And you can give them a million things. I think Sean talks about this a lot. He says, here are 3 or 4 exercises you can do. Don't do them all, right? Pick one, do that one, stay with it, stay diligent on that one. When you're done with that and becomes a habit, then you can take on number 2.
Yep.
A lot of our content is about explaining the why and then leaving the what. What do I do to put this in my life? And we get tremendous feedback from our readers. They'll say, hey, I took this tip, I did that. Or I encounter somebody at a conference and they say, just doing that one thing changed my life. So it's really fulfilling. But our goal is to get people to take action. It's easy to sit and read all day. It's harder to change what you do. And that's kind of our goal in life. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think that was great.
But
I think it was great.
But yeah,
And so,
doing something's important.
Yeah.
why do you think it's now that the conversation seems to be shifting in small ways? And we don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. We are in very interesting times on the news, as you all know. So, in the midst of what feels like to many people, a very disempowering news cycle, why are we opening up space? Like, what's happening that's allowing for us to really put a focus on these important topics that speak more to who we are as human beings, as opposed to the next Lindsay Lohan or negative news story that we can find?
Well, I can tell you that especially for Latinos,
Yeah.
Latin Americans living in this country right now, if we are going to turn on the news as our guidance, we live on antidepressant pills. Yeah, because if you listen to what is being broadcasted, mostly, it creates anxiety. It creates a lot of uncertainty. It creates negativity. It creates division. It creates separation.
Yeah.
And my advice, and what I think that has worked for so many people, is that before you tune in to the world, you have to tune in into your inner world. So, this is what it has worked for me.
Yeah.
Before I turn on the news, I kind of tune in with my inner world so that I get the antidote. Because there is so much information that more than ever, you don't know really the reliable sources, these guys with, on the web with credibility. So people are really confused, really overwhelmed with so many things getting into their smartphones. And more than ever, things like you do, Deborah, John, are necessary, are crucial to orienting and giving us the opportunity to have the tools, the strategies, the tactics to kind of keep our lives on a serene and quiet and in control mode. Because otherwise, really, you feel that you have nothing to do with what's going on outside in the world with the headlines. So, for the Latin community right now in this country, I'm so happy to see that so many of the Spanish media has not only started broadcasting what is being said, but they are doing town halls and they are doing things to kind of give people a sense of calmness, orientation, and positive, news, at least to inform them. What are their rights? What are the opportunities? To bring lawyers to say, hey, this is not so bad as you heard in the headline. You have options here, maybe limited options, but you have options. Yep. So don't get into the high peak anxiety level now because you're anticipating something that probably is not going to happen to you or your family.
Yeah.
So especially for my community, it's really, it's a time that a lot of people are living not with high hopes.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because this is a country that should be happy because of its diversity, not because of their segregation. I'm sorry, I don't want to go into politics, but this is reality.
Hey, I'm running this panel, and I agree with you, so hey. And I think that speaks to a really important point, which is what the image that we broadcast on the news and the image that we see on the news becomes the image that we hold in our mind, and then it's sort of a vicious cycle. And so by doing these kinds of town halls, the calls to action, the tools, that changes where our brain goes,
yes.
right? When we start to see solutions, when we start to see hope, when we start to see possibility, our brain believes in potential, and it starts to see that other side of the story. John, talk to me about health and that conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so we did some kind of research into our own audience as we were kind of getting ready to launch the channel, and what was sort of astonishing to us, and sort of gets to your point, is that only 13% of millennials felt comfortable managing their own health. But when you think about the amount of access to information I have, that's sort of shocking unto itself, but it's even more shocking because with this, I know how many steps I've taken, I know my heart rate, I also know what time it is. But it's sort of, what do I do with that information? There's sort of this, and someone else mentioned this and I've just started using it, this paradox of abundance, right? Where you become frozen because you go to a website and it says, meditation is good for you. You go to another and it says meditation is not good for you. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't even know how to begin, so I'm just not going to do anything and kind of keep going on my path. And I think there's this need of sort of trusted news sources that you can turn to help you on your kind of journey through life. And our approach to it as it relates to health is sort of to be your companion and your friend. So when we kind of were looking at the media landscape out there, you have folks like a CNN who are talking about health, but almost more from a health care and world health perspective versus a conversation you may have with your friend about meditating or yoga or nutrition or working out or lack of working out or that kind of thing. And the other interesting thing we've seen is this shift, particularly amongst younger people, of what health means to them. And it's a much more holistic approach. It's the idea that health and wellness is sort of at the core of who we are as people and how we live our lives versus, okay, it's January, I just ate a bunch of food over the holidays, now I'm going to go on a diet. Or spring break's coming up, so let me actually start working out. But rather, how can I live on this even sort of playing field the whole way through where I'm living healthy, I'm living happy, I'm being proactive about my health. And there was just no one we found talking to younger people in that way as a friend about how you can be healthier and happier. And healthy and happy doesn't necessarily mean, sunny skies, 72 all the time. You can go out and still do yoga, and they're not mutually exclusive of each other. And so I think the way we look at it and the way we approach it is a much more realistic and honest way towards health and happiness. And someone was saying it yesterday, I was on the Lululemon panel, if you can't experience, you can't experience success if failure is not an option, and so therefore you can't experience happiness if sadness is not an option. And so with that, it's sort of looking at both sides of the coin and being honest and upfront about it and educating people enough so that they can then make a decision. And then sort of to your point of giving them the options of what that decision may be or how they may go about and do that.
And I want to ask this to each of you: how do news consumers, we get to play both sides of the coin, but how does the general public support a positive shift in media?
I like to think, we're talking about a shift in media, and I want to go back, show my age a little bit. There was a point where talk shows were all negative. The Jerry Springer effect. Remember Jerry Springer? And what was so revolutionary about Oprah is she basically stood up one day and said, I'm not going to put this negative junk on television anymore. I'm not going to play to the baser instincts. I'm not going to play to the salacious craziness. And all of a sudden, Oprah broke out and became this hugely different show that people just followed. And and if you look at Ellen's kind of followed in her footsteps. People will gravitate to the positive if you give them the opportunity to. But it really is about making sure you're connecting at point, so if you connect with the reader, or if you connect, in our case, readers or listeners to our podcast or whatever it is, you have to connect on an emotional level. It's not enough to give them the information, you have to give them the stories. So it's really important for us to find those unique stories about individuals who are doing something that people can go, either really respect and say, hey, that person's making a huge difference in life, or who they can say, I could be that person. We were just talking, my science editor's here, Paula, we were just talking in the back of the room about an upcoming article she's going to write about this 98-year-old woman who teaches yoga still. She's like one of the oldest living yoga instructors in the world, and she's had this fascinating life where she's done all of these things from, I'm giving away the story and it's not going to appear till December, but she's done all of these fascinating things from she was German, helping the Jews escape Germany, to marching with Martin Luther King and walking with Mahatma Gandhi. Those types of stories, if you can tell them in a compelling way, you can really relate to your reader, and they'll come back for more, and they'll start connecting, and then they'll start taking the information you're giving them and putting into action. But if you don't connect at the heart level, which is what Oprah, I hearken back to Oprah because that's what she did that no one else was doing at that time. And in her new story Belief, her new series Belief that she can't sponsor, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing. When you get people, she tells a story in a way that it touches people's hearts. And as media people, if we're not doing that, we're just really not going to keep them. Because information is just information. You have to tell the story and give them the why and have them build the connection. So that, to me, that's what the readers are looking for, and that's where we get the best response.
Okay. And I would even say, too, that what you were getting at is the quality of the content, right? Everyone can tell that story, and everyone does tell that story, but I think there are some outlets out there that do a much better job of it than others. And so if the same production value you're putting behind maybe the evening news to show the disasters, you're putting behind the positive news to show the other side of it, people will watch and people will come back. And so there has to be that investment, I think, from the media company to say, we're going to take this just as seriously. We're going to take the baby panda being born just as seriously as we will the disaster from a production quality standpoint, because we want to start shifting people's perception and the consumer's perception of how we're talking about things, and that it's all not just negative.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say I don't know all the programs about mass communications or journalism across the world, but I can tell you about my program at York University in Toronto, Canada, where I studied mass communications. I think we have to change the model of educating people to be on mainstream media, because we think and we teach people how to be objective, pursue a story, and 3 or 4 years studying to really become a reporter. Really, do you need that much time to learn how to ask what I was taught? Who are you? What happened? Why did it happen? Where did it happen? At what time it happened? Like the 5 basic questions that a journalist should ask to build story. It's more than that, because at the end, what makes a difference is what Deborah said, the intention, the purpose that you have using the window or the Tribune or the voice that you have. And you have no intention if you're a journalist, because you never really were educated that you have to make a difference with whatever you broadcast, that you have to have an intention with whatever you broadcast. And you know what happens? That I feel that even journalists, sometimes they don't think that being mindful, it's part of what they need to do. Because we are not taught in a journalism school or a mass communications career about mindfulness, about leadership from the soul, about positive psychology, and at the end, you have some other tools that we think that they are kind of precise and objective and very pragmatic, but these other ones are the ones that will kind of align people with a mission to better the world, not just to put out whatever it is without intentions. And that's how I feel that we can improve mainstream media. If we create mindful communicators.
I couldn't agree with you more. In the process of writing my book, I went to meet with a 40-year-old veteran of TV news in this kind of old and dusty office in NBC, and the books were coming off the shelves. I felt like they were closing in on us. And and I said, so, tell me about our jobs as journalists. Are we meant to just capture the story? Is it okay to, basically, are we leaders or are we reflectors of society? And it was so interesting to see how he actually, someone who's been in news for that long, struggled with that question. And to me, after thinking about the research and looking at so many amazing journalists' work, and I can see that you can't truly reflect. It's like what you said about we're looking at the table in two different ways, right? We all have different perceptions of the world, and so once we start talking about a story, once we choose our words, once we choose who to interview, the interview style that we use, we're all of a sudden leading in those choices. And so I completely agree that bringing that mindfulness into journalism, using the right tools and empowering people with calls to action, I think that's how we begin to change the conversation. And then on the news consumer side, what topics are we talking about with our friends? What are we sharing on social media? Are we lifting up the journalists who are finding those solutions to problems that we're facing? That, I think, is a strong way to support the community that's making a difference. And I think that's how we find a new kind of journalism. I'm just mindful of the clock, and I'm so deeply grateful to the three of you. If you have any questions, we will be around, and we would love to talk with you. But I just want to thank our guests, Deborah, Ismael, John, and thank all of you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This was great.